Market Analysis 101. What an eventful week we have had. I think that the first disclaimer that we need to make here is that we do not have a crystal ball, and yet we still hit our target of 3008. Actually, we went a little bit lower than 3008. We hit 3004.2 on the S&P. So we were off by $4. By the way, if you haven't subscribed, please go ahead and click that subscribe and hit that like button. This will help us provide you with notifications every time that we upload a video with these targets. Also, in the comment area, let me know what helps you from these reviews and what doesn't help you so that we can remove the noise and get to the point. I try to provide all angles from a learning perspective to targets to habits around trading. That said, on the weekend special, we talked about the 3008 area. Also on the Tuesday video, we talked about the 3008 area, and it became an important support line where the market ended. And again, and I agree with most experienced traders that the market doesn't do anything by coincidence. There's always a point, there's always a reason why they're doing what they're doing. And so we hit that 3008, we stop right there. And before we start getting into targets, let's talk about what has happened throughout the whole week. So in order to do that, let's drill down to the 30-minute so I could give you a good perspective of what's happening in the market. So this goes back a little bit more than a week. It goes back to 2015 where we had a pivot and we bounced out of that area and we came to this resistance area that we created over the following 2 weeks. Ultimately, as we came down, and what we ended up creating was a complex correction. What that means is that we came down here, we did this pattern here, and then we came up here, and then we didn't really fulfill that full correction. So we got this sort of ABC pattern here, and in addition to that, we extended or we added a little bit more drama to our scenario, and then we were followed by a sort of complex correction where we did a WXY pattern. In between, we sort of have this, and I know this is getting kind of complex here, but follow me. We did a B, C here, right? We had a B, C there, and then we also have an A, B, C, C here. I'm actually delayed here with my with me putting these points. In addition to that, it was interesting to me looking at the 1 hour and doing some trend setting here. In addition to that, it was kind of interesting for me as I was looking at the trends of what we were forming, because I was trying to figure out where we're headed at, and I don't want to get biased. And in efforts of not becoming biased, I wanted to look at it from all angles. I wanted to look at it from a bearish angle. I wanted to look at it from a bullish angle. And so this was a little bit interesting to me to start seeing what type of pattern we were creating. And for those that know pattern or have learned how to identify patterns, we are in some sort of descending wedge, which ultimately, one thing that you want to keep in mind when you're looking at wedges is that wedges usually channels and wedges break out. And so in this case, this looks a little bit bullish from that perspective. So again, in efforts of not being biased, we have a channel here. If you look at it a little bit more closer, it starts looking a bit like a wedge, but we don't want to bring our bias in and start seeing what we want to see. But in this case, this is what we got at the moment. It's trending down. So essentially, we're sort of about to do this slingshot move where we've come down. We contended with this area that we talked about, that 3008 area, which really was 3006. and then we spiked through it. We had a lot of spikes, trying to break that support line, because again, if we break that support line, then other things kick in, and we might see ourselves now moving even far lower than what we expected. So one of the things that we saw at the end of the market or after hours is that the market spiked up. We started moving up and we started making sort of an uptrend. So I wasn't too surprised about it, because again, we talked about that 3008 area. We talked about this, well, now, right, 3004 area. We talked about it. We identified that this was a bounce pivot area, and so the market, and it's trying to follow through with that bounce. So again, we have a channel, looks great. Um, if if you're looking for the market to pop up, then there is that possibility there that we're looking at that. Let's go back to the S&P. That's not the CFD. And so going back to this sort of charting or technical analysis that we're doing, it would seem that we are done. So there is a likelihood that we might see a pop up. The question is, will we get back to that 3154, and will we break that 3154? And to provide the scenarios, if we do go back and we're climbing towards that 3154, it is likely that we will blow through this. And again, we're going to have to then go ahead and contend with this. And again, we're going to have to contend with this island in this area. Again, because if we are in a bearish cycle, again, is going to drive a lot of volatility. And so we have to be very careful if we do move up to this area. Now, if we break this area, and the way that we have read this, or the way that we're looking at this right now, doesn't really play out, then we have the 2956 area, 2956, give or take a few. Again, sort of eyeballing it here. We do have that area where we could bounce off of and then start moving higher again to fulfill sort of this ABC. Because at the moment, the ABC that we've created here is not fully complete. You would think that if we stopped here that we're completed. The reality is that we have to see this extend even further to complete this ABC. Now, it is not uncommon to have a truncated C and have the market then pivot up. So this is why this 3006, 3004, 3008, whatever you want to call it now at this point, is an area where we have to keep an eye, and we're going to have to keep an eye now moving forward for Sunday and Monday. So if on Sunday or Monday we are below that 3004, or in our case Friday's low, then we're going to continue moving lower, and we're going to have to and we're going to keep an eye on that 2956 before we get to that 2875 area. If we start our week above that 3004, 3006, 3008 area, then keep an eye, because it might be an opportunity to enter into a trade on the way up. So as some final thoughts, what is scenario one? Scenario one is that we stay in this area and bounce, and we start moving higher. Scenario two would be that we start below the area where we left off on Friday, and we hit this area and we bounce from this area and then also move higher. Now, if we blow through that 2956 area, then we do have that 2875 area that we would have to contend again. Again, for those that don't know about that 2875, I would recommend for you to look at the previous two videos that talked about why this area is a support line and why this becomes an important support line. Now, the last scenario that we have is that we blow through all these and we fulfill the bearish scenario. Now, if we blow through those two trend lines, we also have this 2768 as the final support line that would keep the market bullish. And if we blow through that 2768 area, that is when the market now falls off of a cliff, and we are starting to look at the idea of retesting the lows, or getting into that area, or even going through those lows. We will talk about that throughout the week to talk about those scenarios as well. But for the moment, these are the scenarios that we have to keep an eye on. Number one, we have to keep an eye on this pivot area here. And if we start the week below that area, then again, we have these three areas where we could find some support. Now, to talk about the final thoughts, now to focus on habits, one of the habits that I want to share with you is focusing on learning what correction patterns look like. Because once you understand how the correction patterns look like, then you're able to identify when you have a bullish movement up and when you have a retracement, and how to get in and get out of the market profitable. So I think that's one of those things that's important. The fact that you see me charting oddly for this week is because I've spent a lot of time reading. I have spent a lot of time looking at different charts, going online, and learning from other folks who have identified different patterns historically speaking. And so that helps me bring these elements into not only into this program, but personally myself, as I'm trading throughout the day, I'm looking to identify these patterns so that I could identify areas where I could enter and then exit the market. So a good example of that is that 3008 area. The 3008 area, where that comes from, is specifically from looking at a corrective pattern. And so ultimately, I didn't only find the 3000 area as a pivot point, but I also found it as a support line. So again, I want to encourage you guys to take some time, read, start learning about corrective patterns. That said, this is the market wrap up. Stay safe and stay profitable.